I was admittedly dreading this review. No pun intended. I successfully managed to avoid most spoilers walking in. All but one, actually. I'll talk about it later. And I was like, okay, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. Maybe. I don't know. It's a Metroid game. We just spent several weeks covering the Mega Mans. And if you remember, one of the things I mentioned was there's two games that are really in my wheelhouse. Mega Mans and Metroids. And both of them had the exact same problem. Even though Mega Man 11 was a very well-selling game, 1.4 million units that they've reported, I believe. Nevertheless, that put them at like the 40th slot for their selling games within the last year or so. Or 2 years, I think it was. And that just says all it needs to. Even though these games are my personal favorites, they are, and I have to admit this, effectively niche games. It's the Deep Space Nine thing all over again, for those of you who cover the Star Trek stuff, or those of you who watch my coverage of Star Trek stuff. No matter how much we love it, the truth is, it just doesn't sell the same as other things do, right? So Metroid hasn't really gotten as much attention as the Marios, or the Zeldas, or the Animal Crossings, or the Pokemons. Now, in some ways, that's a good thing, because it means we don't get some morbid crap on the side. But on the other hand, it does mean that every time a new Metroid game or a new Mega Man game comes out, it's always a bit of a... Because we don't get a lot of these. We don't get a lot of chances for these to be good. So each one, it's a little bit more important for it to be good. I know that sounds like a strange way to put that, but we're getting a new Mario game. We're getting a new Zelda game. We're getting a new Monster Hunter game. You know, Resident Evil's getting his thing, blah, blah, blah. This is something that only gets the periodic chance to shine. And we don't want another M, so... I should have made a dumb joke there. During the stream, during the load things, I was reading out dad jokes. I should have been, this is the game's chance to shine, Spark! Yeah, no, it's not funny. Let's talk about this game, because obviously I've heard that it's a little bit divisive. I don't know why. I suppose that's just the internet nowadays, right? You can either hate something or love something. As usual, I'm both. So... the fact that you can't skip cutscenes on the first time through the game is a little bit aggravating, especially that very long intro cutscene. The fact that the game likes to pull little unfair moments with its gacha level design. Again, as a reminder, gacha, G-O-T-C-H-A, not G-A-C-H-A. It's not my fault they named it the same thing. What do you want from me? The boss fights have way too much health. In fact, it's actually funny. This is the Reese's problem all over again. You get one Reese's cup and that's awesome. But if you're forced to eat like 15 before you can move on, it doesn't matter that it's good. It starts to kind of get after a while. And that's the boss fights. But I'll get back to that in a minute. There's several maneuvers and mechanics in this game that they don't explain at all. That there is some effort to tutorialize, but not a large amount. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I have played every Metroid game part of this, there's several things I probably wouldn't have even figured out. And there are several things I didn't figure out until chat pointed them out. Like, there was one puzzle where I was like, and I just sat and stared at it for a long, and I said, this is impossible, ... with my current understanding of the game. You know what that means, right? Anybody who's played any kind of puzzles, whether it's like a physical puzzle or a word puzzle or a video game puzzle, you know what that's like. When you stare at the puzzle and you say, this isn't possible with what I currently know I can do. Right? Now, usually in puzzles, what that means is you need to go get something else that unlocks a new mechanic or a new gimmick. But in this case, there were several things that I already had access to, I just didn't know about. Probably the most obvious one is the fact that the dash blocks destroy each other. Now, one I was stuck at for several minutes. But there are other examples of that as well. Looking at you, retaining a shine spark on a slide, you know, on a ramp. And then there's the total lack of options. This is weird. There's no ability to change the film grain. There's no ability for a chromatic stuff or whatever. There's no subtitle options of any kind. There's no rebinding of the controllers. There's nothing. There's no audio options. There's literally zero audio options. Never mind actually having multiple sliders like the aforementioned Mega Man 11 where we had voice, sound effects, and music on separate tracks. Just no options in this game, which is very strange. It also has a very lazy difficulty mode. You know me, I'm very harsh about difficulty because I'm pretty anti-lazy difficulty, which is more health, more damage, right? Or less health, less damage, or whatever. You get the idea. It's the Oblivion slider, right? Not great. The Emmy fights can get a little bit based, near as I could tell, on either pure RNG or how much you're willing to be able to put up with certain nonsense during those fights. The Aurora fights are actively boring and get more boring the further into the game you get. And then there's the fact that I got something like, I think, 9 power bombs before I could even use the damn things. All of these things are not huge complaints, but I bring these up first because I want it to be clear that that's 9 gameplay negatives that I gave this game, which is not a small number of gameplay negatives for a game this relatively short. We had clocked in, I think, at 12 hours and 20 minutes, I think it was. We did 100% it. Because, of course, we did. It's a Metroid game, and I was actually enjoying myself. And I suppose I should go ahead and give away that I really liked this game, despite the negatives. What's interesting to me is that this game was actually in production all the way back in 2005. They were originally working on this for the DS. And they looked at that and said, yeah, the tech isn't there. Good call, I think, in all honesty. I've played a lot of games on the DS, and I love a lot of games on the DS, but I don't think this was a DS game. So maybe a 3DS game. I'm one of those people who actually really liked Samus Returns. But at the same time, looking at that, I could see why they would want to hold off on that. Near as I can tell, and there's only intermittent interviews, and most of what I have is gleaned from before this game came out. But near as I can tell, the idea for Metroid Dread was already effectively written out and ready to go after Fusion. Pretty shortly after Fusion, actually. So they already had the general concepts and the idea with the Chosen and all that fun stuff. And they were like, let's put Metroid on ice because of the aforementioned, niche problem I just mentioned. And the fact, excuse me, and the fact that they felt the tech just wasn't quite there. Okay, cool. Then some years pass and they're like, they do what a lot of companies do. Let's test the waters a little bit. So they did Samus Returns. Samus Returns was obviously by Mercury Steam and with corroboration from the actual Metroid team over at Nintendo, sold pretty damned well. I actually have the Samus Returns Samus amiibo right there. It's a great amiibo. That's why I got it. I also got the Metroid right over there. It's harder to see because of the black backdrop. It's right there. Anyways, so okay, that sold pretty well, and it was a teaser for Dread. That I'm pretty sure they were already working on Dread before that because that's how companies work. You got the vine swinging mentality when it comes to development. But I think that was part of why they've been putting so much weight behind Metroid Dread. I know I've been talking about weight a lot lately. I apologize. It just keeps coming up. I talk about things as they come up. That's the rule. I don't plan this stuff, I swear. I didn't plan for the Rumination on Princess Bride to go live the day of his birthday. I really didn't. Anyways, unless I'm a Time Lord, which you never know. The weight that was put behind Metroid Dread is not insignificant. And this is important, because weight almost always leads to sales. Not always, but it is a big magnifier with regards to how well a game tends to sell. Not only because it increases the game's quality, usually asterisk, but it also tends to have a big effect on the marketing side of things. And Metroid Dread was very well marketed. This is something I commented on from the very beginning, and something I have been commenting on as we've been leading up to its release. They have clearly been actually trying to support Metroid Dread, and frankly, I think that's why it sold so well. Oh, don't mistake me. It's a good game, and I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed it. But the reason this game has sold this well, this quickly, something like, I think, 800,000 units pushed that they're reporting, as of the mention of this video, that's good numbers. But I'm pretty sure the main reason is because of the actual push in the market. And I'm just getting repetitive. I'm sorry. I'm working on like 4 hours of sleep. Please work with me here. I'm sorry. I gotta do theater work later. I gotta do it. So looking at this game, this is a perfect example of one of the things that I do like about Nintendo Studios' approach to some of its titles. Let me walk that back a bit, because obviously Mercury Steam did a lot of work on this game, and I don't want to sound dismissive towards them. What I mean is, it's kind of rare that a developer/publisher will say, when it's ready. It's pretty rare that happens. It has happened, obviously, and it's been Nintendo's policy, arguably, since Wind Waker to follow that mentality. But given that this very week, one of the things I'm going to be talking about is the GTA remasters, which were clearly pushed out in a rushed fashion, you could see why it's still kind of unusual to see this kind of mentality. It's very obvious they wanted to polish this game to a shine. Not making the joke, because I mean that sincerely. This is one of the most polished games I've played in recent memory. Despite all the complaints I have about the previous stuff, most of that is design choices, as opposed to some of the things we usually give negatives for, like bugs or issues or fluid problems or whatever. You know, things that are a result of a game not getting the polish it needs. Dragon Age 2. Instead, what we have is a wonderful system. The first thing I want to talk about is flow, because it's the thing I hear everyone else talk about. Now, flow is one of the hardest things to describe to someone who isn't playing the game, because flow is all about how the game, how about there's a nice, smooth cycle and loop between the game and the player is what that really boils down to. Now, the game itself has to have flow too. That's an aspect of pacing, and that's related to this, which this game also has. But the fact is, you have to be feeling like you are smoothly operating the game while smoothly moving through the game. Both of those loops need to be concurrent for a game to have truly good flow. And it's actually pretty rare, which is one of the reasons I praise it so damned much in this case. This is one of the most fluid, moving, pacing, flowing games I've played in recent memory. And again, everyone comments on this because just about everyone else I've seen who's played the game has said the exact same thing. This game just and the thing is, how do you describe flow from a game design perspective? It's all about the details. You have to do so many little nitty-gritty little things to make this work. You have to make sure that the knockback animation when you take damage is relatively minor, so you can keep moving forwards if you do actually accidentally get hit. You have to make sure that there is a bit of a, I don't know what it's called, a gimme range for when you grab a ledge to make sure that you're actually going to grab the ledge and move up on it. You need to make sure that there's no moments where the player tries to accidentally hit the wrong controller, so you need to make it so that this type of movement and this type of action are both the kind of things that you can only do if you're trying to very deliberately do them. So in other words, you're still keeping the movement pacing good. You have to make sure that all of the animations are there to try and encourage you to keep going regardless of movement, so there's no animation locking, and there's a whole lot of animation canceling. There's so many tiny little things, nitty-gritty details that make flow happen. And it's very clear that the people who worked on this game looked at this and said, okay, hang on. And I could just picture, because this is how I would do it, I could just picture like having a section of gameplay and, you know, having a fairly normal selection of stuff. So there's like a thing where there's a 1 square height, there's a couple enemies here, there's a ledge to grab, there's a magnet thing, you know, there's all this stuff, just like a vertical slice, if you will, of the game, and having them play through it and saying, okay, that didn't feel right and that didn't feel right. How do we fix that? Well, why don't we make it? And so they remove the knockback option. So you hit the thing and then you just kind of keep going through. Okay. So then we play through it again. Okay, that kind of worked, but this section didn't quite work. How do we make this work? And so forth and so on. Just navigating this game is a treat, and it should be. It's a Metroid. That's one of the things that a Metroid game should have, since Metroid games are very big on exploration, guidance and flow, and backtracking. Now, guidance and flow is the next thing I want to talk about, obviously. It's obviously related to the flow. But guidance is specifically how the game encourages you to explore. Now, I know there's some differing opinions on this, and that's fine. That's always cool, and I'm looking forward to differing opinions on this one because, I mean, I had at least a few people pop into chat who are like, this game sucks. And that's valid, you know? I mean, no, it really is. I'm with it. I don't like Hearts of Iron 4, for example. So, you know. But the reason I bring this up is because I feel that this game does an excellent job of doing this. So some games, they just have a secret up here and a secret over here and a secret over here. Figure it out. And the way you figure it out is you scan or you check or you just do everything. Now, some people like that. I don't. I prefer a game design that is more involved. Because, and I don't mean that, I'm sorry, that sounds derogatory. I'm tired, I swear. Just bear with me. What I mean by that is less time and effort is involved in placing those items there than informing the terrain. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Designing the terrain so it informs the player that there might be something in that direction, or there might be something along these walls, or maybe there's just something in this room. The kind of stuff that you can do, and I'm not just talking about, you know, the scanner vision from the Batman series. I mean actual aspects of level design or enemy encounters or movement that make it inclined. In first-person games, this tends to be an aspect of camera. One of the things we saw in Cyberpunk, actually, if the game did a lot wrong, but one of the things it did right was it would usually do little sections where the camera was inclined to look in a certain direction, just because of the fact that you're going through a corridor like this, so you're probably going to be looking in this direction, so you see this, which makes you think there's something over there, etc. It's stuff that's designed to draw your attention, one way or the other, towards that. And it doesn't have to hold your hand. That's why this is so much more difficult and why I praise it so much. Because holding your hand is actually pretty easy to do from a game design perspective. Hey, there's an item up here. Or there's a flashing light, or that you turn on detective vision and you see it, or whatever. It's just right there, right? Done. Doing this kind of guidance and flow is much harder, and this game is probably the best game I have ever seen with regards to guidance and flow. The funneling in this game is real, but it never felt like railroading, probably because it kinda isn't. There is an amazingly, almost subliminal nature to this game, constantly guiding you on a specific path. And the game continues to funnel very far into it. We don't actually get the freedom point, arguably, until we get the power bombs, but I would say the screw attack is probably the moment when we get the freedom point. For those who never heard me talk about that, the freedom point is exactly what it sounds like. It's the moment at which you can go and explore and do whatever in whatever order. Most Metroid games have this. Most RPGs tend to have something like this, like when you get the airship. So the freedom point in this game is when you get the screw attack, which is the second to last upgrade. It is very far into the game. Yes, I know there's sequence breaks. We're not getting into that right now. And yet, despite that, it never felt like someone was going, go this way, because of how much effort and small details they put into that design of flow and guidance I was just talking about. So that's all excellent, but I just mentioned backtracking. How's the backtracking in this game? Really, really good. I actually have my notes up right here. Let me scroll down a little bit here. It looks like I did end up only giving 2 positives to backtracking, so this isn't the best backtracking I've ever seen in my life, because that's what the 3 positives would require. But it definitely is excellent backtracking, because there's 2 things that really are involved when it comes to good backtracking design. And most Metroid games do this properly. The first is you have to make the backtracking fun. That's usually an aspect of how you navigate the game, traversal mechanics. In this case, the aforementioned flow, the slide, the dash, the jump ball, just all the stuff you can do, all the tech you can do in order to move in this game, which again, all feels very flowy. That pretty much guarantees the first backtracking plus. Cool. But to get more than that 1 plus, you have to do something extra. Usually that involves changing the nature of the area you're going back through. In an RPG, maybe the people say something different, or maybe the mood is different, the music has changed, and there's a more somber tone, or maybe it's more happy because you did something good and you've helped out the town. In something like a Metroid game, it usually involves the terrain literally changing, or because you can interact with the terrain differently, it literally changes. In this case, they did both. They gave us options to move through the terrain in a different manner because of the various kit we get, but they also gave us actually different areas. When we go back through certain areas, most notably Artaria, when it gets all frozen over, spoiler, that's aspects of excellent game backtracking. That's aspects of actually changing up the backtracking in order to make it interesting, because we are effectively going through a different level. And that's the key right there. That's what really helps to add that second positive to something like a backtracking design. So, okay, that's the 3 pillars of a Metroid game all covered. Cool. How's the combat? Now, I get why they wanted to lean on this. It's pretty much the same reason they did it in Samus Returns, because you've got the full analog, 360 aiming thing. I really wish there was an option to just use the D-pad in this game. Because, so, this is one of those weird things. Actually, where is, oh, it's over. So my Switch Pro controller isn't here right now, because I lent it out to someone for the temporary. So I'm not sure if the Switch Pro controller has notches in the left analog stick. If anybody knows, feel free to mention it in the comments. But the reason I mention notches is because, it's not because I love Minecraft, it's because of the fact that the analog stick just does this. So if you want to aim down, you have to kind of aim downish. Now, I use the Joy-Cons. I do like the Joy-Cons. I do praise the Joy-Cons, but on any analog which doesn't have this, the PS3 has this problem too, for example, just aiming down is kind of a crapshoot, especially when you want to aim straight down. Whereas on a D-pad, you hold the down button. It's binary, as opposed to analog. And I should stop doing that, trying to connect to my Switch. So you just hold down. And there are several times when I just wanted to hold down, or I just want to hold right, or left, or up, or to diagonal, any of the 8 diagonals. And that just wasn't an option. I was stuck with the analog. And in several cases, that kind of sucked. Anybody who actually watched my stream noticed that I had trouble with some of the specific Shine Spark puzzles because I couldn't get it to aim down while I was in a hurry. And some people who watched the stream also noticed I had trouble with some of the bosses because I couldn't get it to aim properly when I was already frenetically trying to dodge 15 attacks coming at me at Mach speed. This is as good a time as any to mention that while I do have issues with the controls, and I do, Someone in chat mentioned this. I forget who. Please forgive me. But they said that the game feels like it needs more buttons and yet should use its existing buttons better at the same time. And I agree with that. It's why just rebinding it in the Switch menu wasn't really a valid answer, because we still have to rebind everything all over the place, and certain buttons feel like they shouldn't be separate buttons. They should be shortcut buttons. Nevertheless, other than a few niggles with the controls were good. It's just they were good except when they were bad. So this is a good and a bad kind of scenario. But I mentioned the controls especially, and the bosses especially, because I really, really liked the boss fights in this game. We have the Chozo bots, which are kind of mini bosses. We have the Chozo Dragoons, which are definitely mini bosses and slowly escalate over time. They're fun. Have a little bit too much health. We already talked about that. We have the big bosses. I suppose this is as far as we can get without actually spoiling, so we're just going to put up spoiler warning. Spoiler. If you somehow haven't played this game before, there's a good time to go ahead and pause to go play the game. I'll just wait a moment. The Crade Fight, yeah, I know it was in the trailers, but I still like to be cautious. The Crade Fight was actually really fun. He has a huge number of attacks, at least 3 general paths to defeat him that I could keep track of. And there's, of course, the sequence break with the ball, which I didn't do because I didn't sequence break because it's a review. But the fact that they accounted for that shows how much thought and effort they put into the boss designs. There's also I wrote it down, its name, Experiment number Z-57, which is an awesome boss fight, except for the fact that it has too much health, because, again, it's possible to completely no-sell that boss fight. And call me a weirdo, I like boss design where there's no damage tax. Let me explain that really quickly. Damage tax is exactly what it sounds like. It's a very common element in game design. It's unavoidable damage. This is really, really common in MMOs, because MMOs usually have a healer class, and they want to make sure the healer has something to do no matter what. But this is a common thing in a lot of games. And in most other games, they just call it, like I said, the damage tax, where it's like, you can't avoid this. You have to deal with this in some way or another, either by having enough health, or having enough refills, or being able to kill enough enemies to move forward, or whatever, right? There's no damage tax on, I think, any of the bosses in this game. You can just straight up avoid pretty much everything they do. I do like that design. In some cases, I elected to specifically take damage because it gave me an advantage on the boss fight, especially the final boss fight, which is also an aspect of good design. Again, multiple paths to progression is always good boss design, and a large variety of attacks with multiple methods. Just it's good stuff, big, bombastic. I'm with it. Again, it would be much, much more enjoyable if they just had less health. No, I'm not playing through hard mode because, again, hard mode is cheap difficulty, but at the same time, the main reason I'm not playing through hard mode is that just sounds like that's going to be boring at a certain point. We've talked about bosses, we've talked about the difficulty curve. One of the things I love in this game, we talked about the Chozo bots, we talked about the experiment, we talked about the Dragoons, I think we're going to go ahead and talk about our kit. I wrote down our kit. We have the speed booster, the grapple, the scanner, the diffusion beam, the plasma beam, the ice missile, the super missile, the cloak, the dash, the morph, the bomb, the slide, the magnet, the double jump, the storm missile, the space jump, and the screw attack. Now, some of those are a little bit redundant. You know, the super missile is just your missile again with stronger, which I'm actually really surprised by. And as an aside, I like this design more than I thought I would. The missiles are strong in this game. And I know that sounds like just such a dumb thing to say, but I mean that. It's weird because there's not a lot of Metroid games where your basic missile is actually worth a damn. This is one of them, and I think it worked quite well because it kind of informs the gameplay. Again, you want to use missiles when you want to hit someone big. The super missiles and the ice missiles just kind of add on top of that, right? They encourage you again to do that. And of course, the storm missile is freaking amazing and is easily my favorite power-up in this game. By the way, what's your favorite power-up in this game? But, you know, there's good stuff there. There's good attacks. There's good utility, being able to shoot through stuff or being able to shoot partially through stuff. I love the scanner. This is how you do the scanner. I know they couldn't really do this in Super Metroid, but this is an excellent tool. I 100% of this game, and I didn't look anything up. Now, that being said, some of the Shine Spark puzzles, I did have help from chat. I want to be 100% about that. But my point is, I never felt the need to look things up because of the scanner, which allows you to just throw out a beam, and just for several seconds you can just see stuff. And it doesn't always just tell you the solution, too. Again, it doesn't hold your hand. It says, there's a block over here, and that makes you think. And then you look at the terrain, you look at how that flows, and you think, that feels like that comes from over here. Go ahead and check, and sure enough, whoosh, there you go, and you're rewarded for checking out. I love that. This is going back to that guidance and 12 exploration thing. But the other reason is because of the map. I mentioned the map briefly earlier. This game could have had the best map I've ever seen if it had one change, which I think would be a patchable change. I doubt it'll happen. So we have a map with color indicators for the type of rooms. It has blinking stuff to indicate where items are. So let me explain that. If you go into an area, let's say you're walking through a room, and it's like, oh, hey, there's an item here. What'll happen is if you haven't uncovered the item, there'll be like a square indicating the range in which that item is in. Vroom, vroom. It just kind of blinks quietly, both on the mini-map and on the map. And the best part is, once again, this is part of the guidance design. Because they could have changed however big or small they wanted this square to be. It could be huge to not really indicate much. It could be too small to indicate too much. Instead, what it does is it grabs a section of terrain to make you think this is the terrain that's relevant to this item. Now, it's not always. Sometimes you have to actually do this to get to that item. But the point is, they always got you thinking about where you should be exploring to try and find this item within this range. Thought was put into all of this. Just, God, I love the polish in this game. So we got that. Once you actually find an item, if you've uncovered it but can't get it, then it's just there on the mini-map. Or on the map, excuse me. It shows you where the enemy locations are. It fills out where you've been. This is actually more important than it sounds. So let's say you've got a big empty room. Now you've walked into this room and walked out of this room and nothing else. So what you'll see on the map is you'll see the room, but all of this is like darker colored, whereas this over here, the corner where you came in, that's lighter colored. Why is that relevant? Because if you're going back and trying to figure out what you haven't checked, you could see, well, I never actually explored that room. I didn't have any reason to, but I never did. So now we could put that on the checklist, go back through, explore through the room, and try to see if there's anything else in here, and occasionally there is, and occasionally there isn't. But that kind of keeping track of where you've been is invaluable for that type of thing. The map also allows you to put map markers down. This is good and bad, because on the one hand, it's good. On the other hand, you can only put 6 down per zone, which is extremely confusing. I have no idea why that's the thing. The map also has a filter. I didn't discover this until, like, my final day of streaming. What it is you have to mouse over an item you care about. Now, I'm sorry, let's call it an object you care about. So that can be a type of block, it can be a type of door, it can be an obstacle, it can be a power-up. So, and to be clear, missile plus and missile are 2 separate power-ups, to be clear about this. You mouse over it, you hit Y. What that does is it highlights every single one of those items that you have uncovered on the map. Now, the best part is that highlight varies whether or not you have gotten that item or not, whether you've interacted with that or not. So, in terms of permanently destroyable blocks and terrain, they'll be kind of dimmed if you have, or bright yellow if you haven't. With regards to items, they'll be dim if you've gotten it, or bright yellow if you haven't gotten it. And between all of this, between the map design, between the flow of the map, between the filter I just mentioned, between the indicating box I just mentioned, all of this stuff meant that 100% of this game was fun, not arduous. Now, Super Metroid does rate higher than this game in my golden number statter. However, we haven't done our audit run of Super Metroid, which is on the books. It's going to be part of the Metroid block. And I do have to also mention as an addendum that this is... the difference between the two is very minute. I know that's kind of sacrilegious, but I think this game, at the very least, has it in it to actually defeat Super Metroid as my favorite Metroid game. And it's usually down to nitty-gritty stuff like this. Inches amongst miles, like I like to say. Super Metroid does all of this stuff right, except when it doesn't. How many items are there in Super Metroid where there is no indication that that item is there, except to scan every inch of every terrain? My personal favorite example is there is a missile or energy tank, I don't even know, I think it's a missile, in Meridia. So you go in, there's a turtle, the turtle goes up. Now that indicates to you that you should go up. Good guidance and exploration. So you go up, and there's an E-tank up there. Woo! That's good. What's bad is over on the right wall, about halfway down, there's a ledge you can stand on, and you can get up there, and there's a missile upgrade just in the wall. Nothing indicates that's there. 100%ing in Super Metroid is the kind of thing that I need a guide for. And you get the distinction. Because even though it does all this stuff right, it doesn't do it right as consistently. I think I've talked about most of the things I want to talk about. I suppose I should talk about the ME stuff. This game does have good checkpointing in general. It's usually, it likes to checkpoint between quote-unquote significant events. So if there's a mini-boss, or if there's an ME fight, or if you enter or exit an ME area, that just checkpoints you. Otherwise, it'll send you all the way back to your latest save. There are a decent amount of save points and save placement, so that's not an issue. So no frustrations there. The enemy fights themselves are... It's harder for me to talk about them. Obviously, I do like the idea. Let me just start with that. It's an enemy entirely designed around avoidance. Cool. And you are given multiple tools to avoid. You obviously have all your kit and the wall jump, which you just unlock at the beginning. You've got the magnet stuff you can hang on. You've got the stealth cloak. You've got the dash, which you can help to do that. And you also, I guess that's mostly it. But I feel like there's a couple things I'm missing there. But you have some small kit to simply stay ahead of and avoid these things. Cool. There's some catches and caveats there, because some of the time what they do, they have the XCOM 2 problem. Now, let me explain that. In XCOM 2, there's these stealth missions, right? And the enemies don't know where you are while you're on stealth. What happens is they will then see you, and then they activate it, and then the stage goes to a normal stage. But you can stay in stealth for a huge portion of the mission. In fact, you can stay in stealth for the whole mission if you're very, very careful about it. The problem is the computer, the game, the programming obviously knows where you are. It has to. It's rendering where you are. So what the problem is, and this is a problem going all the way back to like the 90s when it comes to AI design, is the programmers have to come up with a way for the AI to know where you are and not know where you are. Anybody ever play StarCraft and wonder why the enemy just can tell where your base is without doing any scouting? It's because they know where you are. So in XCOM 2, even though you're in stealth, the enemy is like, well, I know you're over here. So they'll just patrol in your direction, and they will follow you. We tested this on camera. They will actually follow you even though they have no reason to, just because they're trying to trigger the fact that they know you're there. It's the same thing with the Emmys. Very, very rarely will the Emmys just turn around and go another direction. It does happen, but many times it's like, well, I know you're here, so I'm going to kind of explore in a way that try to encourage you to move or try to then discover you and then be able to kill you. And while that works, and it is part of the eponymous dread, it also kind of doesn't work because, well, let's just say that early on people were keeping track of my deaths. The ridiculous majority of it, it's like 99% of my deaths were to the Emmys. But not to say I didn't die and other stuff. It's just the overwhelming majority of my deaths were to the Emmys. But the problem is it's after like the 50 marker, there's no real reason to keep track of. Because, and this is part of the flow thing too. Death, death. It's the Celeste thing, right? Try again, try again, try again. Keep that flow going, because the more of a pause in between, the more irritating it is. So I died a lot to those things, and in some cases it feels kind of random. I don't actually have much else to say about this because it would take more time and analysis to really try and get into the nitty-gritty of why. All I'm going to say is that the Emmy sections are a good idea that occasionally was very fun and occasionally was just honestly boring. There was one specific section I remember. I think this is Berenia? No, that doesn't sound right. It's the one who could detect you through walls. And what I needed to do for this section was I needed to go down into the water. I'm pretty sure it was Berenia. Down to the water, over to the zone, up here, unlock a shortcut, and then escape. I did that something like 30-ish times before I finally succeeded at it. Because I just either had RNG problems or because I sucked or because I couldn't get the right sequence of circumstances to happen to make that. Multiple times I got all the way to the door and got detected, and so the door closes when you're detected, so it's death. Also, I have heard, asterisk, that there is variable timing on the counter to be able to counter the guy. And what I mean by that is that I need to sneeze, and I'm trying very hard not to. What I mean by that, pardon me, was that there is a variable time as to whether or not, when the timing is to hit the button. I know it's a very minor, I think it's 3-frame window, but there's a very minor timing for it. And it's not consistent. It's not when the flash happens. It's not when the noise happens. It varies depending on either the enemy or just in general it varies. One of the two. I'm not actually sure which. I don't like that. I think a 3-frame window is fine for me. That means the player is being rewarded for being precise and being able to pull that at a moment's notice. Again, I get why they did that. They did that so that you don't have that consistency. You don't have that certainty of always being able to escape if you know what you're doing. But at that point, I wouldn't even offer it as an option, to be blunt. Since it is so random, first of all, if you're going to do that, just make it random. Just have there be a chance, a dice roll where it can happen. But second of all, and more to the point, maybe don't even have the escape option at all, which I know sounds weird, but my point is, if that's your intent, is to ensure that the player can't escape the enemies, then ensure the players can't escape the enemies. I wouldn't go for that personally, but then again, anything I would do to the enemy fights would be such a significant redesign that it would extend the length of this video by another 10 minutes. My point is, I get where they were going for it, and I don't think they successfully succeeded, except when they did. And to be honest, in my opinion, it's mostly pure randomness as to whether or not the enemies are fun, interesting, engaging, intense, or just, well, okay. One of my favorite encounters, I'll go and share this and I'll move on. One of my favorite encounters was when there was an enemy, I don't remember which one this was. There was a loop that I was going through to try, and you have to get rid of the armor, and then you have to shoot the head, right? So, okay, so let's go through the loop. And, okay, that didn't work. Go through the loop. Okay, try again. Nope, I missed. Go through the loop. Okay, try again. And it was actually reasonably intense because he was right behind me every time. And if not for the shooting the head, this is good design, by the way, it slows them down when you're shooting them in the head. So their advanced speed slows. But you still need a pretty long walkway, for lack of a better way. But you need time to be able to get off that head armor. So I wasn't quite having that time, and that was actually a fairly frenetic and fun event. I liked that. And of course, this is where the checkpointing is good. You die to that one, well, you go back to immediately having the cannon and getting right back into it. So you see why I'm kind of confused about the enemy things. I don't have much to add to that. Let's talk about the narrative side of things. I've hinted at the narrative several times. But what I really need to talk about is this is a Metroid game. I talked about this earlier. One of the reasons I love Metroid games so much is because of their storytelling and because of their suspense. I think we're going to stick with that word. We had a whole discussion on stream about this. I don't like horror, but I love horror. Now, how many of you know what I'm talking about before I even explain this? My brother-in-law and I actually had this exact same discussion just 2 weeks ago at this point. Actually, I guess it's like a week and a half or whatever, but whatever. A couple weeks ago. And it boils down to, if you look at something that's labeled horror, that's not something we're into, generally speaking. What we're into is horrifying things. Half-Life, or Half-Life 2, or Assassin's Creed, or System Shock 2, or, the audio logs. There are several examples we came up with, but honestly, I think the best example is, of course, Metroid. Metroid games are horrifying, but they're not horror games, are they? To put it into perfect perspective, someone in chat said this too. Probably the best example of this is the movie Alien, which is arguably not a horror film. Now, the official term for this is psychological thriller. The problem is that that's a long term, and it also can imply some stuff that I'm not into. But I'm going to stick with the word suspense. I love suspense games. I love games that have that kind of implication. Or you walk into a room. This is an example given on chat as well. You walk into a room. And it's empty, there's no one here, but there's fresh, hot food on the table. Now, that's kind of confusing, but if we add more context to that, it becomes more horrifying, more suspenseful, because what if this is a dead area? What if we're going through the ruins of a long-dead civilization, and we're just smashing through, and we get through, and there's this hot plate of food right in the middle of the town as if nothing happened, and there's no sign of anybody. Those kind of things I'm absolutely into. Now, this goes back to the Bloodborne thing, actually, if we remember talking about that. And Metroid games do that in spades. Metroid games are beautifully suspenseful, wonderfully psychologically thrilling, and of course, horrifying. This game manages the atmosphere of this planet extremely well. It's weird to say this because virtually every Metroid game manages this, but if I have to point to the king, I would probably say Metroid Prime 1, which in addition to having horrifying elements, had an escalation of horror as you move through and read the logs and find out more and more about what the pirates are up to. My personal favorite thing is the Phazon grain. I'm not going to bore you about that, but just holy crap. And that is why I love the story of these games, because that is an element of story that's on the narrative axis. It's like I've been talking about so much with the Mega Man games. Mega Man games have a story. It's just told in the backdrops, the enemy styles, and all the stuff that gives you context, which is what a narrative really is. Plot is usually not a particularly strong element of a Metroid game or a Mega Man game. Plot is the specific sequence of events, right? The plot of A New Hope is defeating the Death Star. The plot of Empire Strikes Back is extremely weak to the point where it's actually hard to describe it. Empire Strikes Back does not have a very strong plot. Mass Effect 2 doesn't have a very strong plot, and so forth and so on. But that's plot, right? Metroid games tend to have not so much on plot. Because the plot is, okay, we're here to stop this stuff, and okay, the enemies are hunting us, and now we have to escape. And does anybody think Adam's acting kind of weird? I wouldn't worry about it. In fairness, I noticed pretty early on that he stopped saying lady. I didn't catch the significance of that. I'll freely admit to that. That was something that was not spoiled for me. Oh, I suppose we should go ahead and get spoilers territory. So spoilers territory, once again, give you a couple of seconds, and that's probably sufficient. The thing that was spoiled for me was that there was a big exposition dump scene from a Chozo. Now, that's kind of irritating because on the one hand, okay, sure, there's an exposition scene, whatever. But on the other hand, that means that there's a Chozo in this game, a living, breathing Chozo. Which is kind of a big deal because this is the first time we've had living, breathing Chozo ever. And we kill both of them. Although arguably, that we didn't kill both of them. But, I mean, they are both killed over the course of this game. So that's the end of the Chozo. That's cool. Hopefully it's the end of the X-Parasites. We didn't even have a Ridley, which I'm very happy about. No. So, plot, not very strong. Moments, very strong. They do a lot of visual storytelling in this game as usual. There's so much that's being said in the background of these games. The experiment, what was it? Experiment Z57. Remember I mentioned that earlier? We see him much earlier in the game. He's in the background in the laboratory before it's actually been turned on. He's just laying there, kind of twitching every now and again. And we come back through later on, and the power's been turned on, and they're jolting him, and he's just we come back a third time. He's gone. That's visual storytelling in a nutshell. Obviously, there are other better examples of that, but that's one just leaps to the top of my mind because it's all over the place. The way they use the rain, the way they have the enemies moving behind the scenes before they actually encounter you. The atmosphere of it, the tone of it, the slowly descending into the underwater facility, the rainy area, the glowing up to the clouds, the the Chozo section where we go through and we find out that there's an area where they managed to seal the X-Parasites and we let them out. Whoops. Oh yeah, by the way, the biggest spoiler for this game is that there are X-Parasites in it. By great fortune, that was not spoiled for me at all. This is why I've given 2 spoiler warnings before we got to this moment. Planned. That was actually planned. Because that's awesome. And it uses the X-Parasites very well. Not only narratively, because they are horrifying creatures of horrifyingness, and pretty much in the same way that the Metroids are, just kind of inverse of that. Metroids consume you by draining you of all your life, and then that you're a desiccated husk. The X-Parasites consume you and replace you with themselves, mimicking you to almost down to the specific molecule. And it's always been implied they also take along memory and concepts along with that. Which is interesting because when the X-Parasite consumes Raven, he becomes this big slavering monstrosity, probably because it's this parasite we specifically knocked into the lava that had grabbed Crade, who we also knocked into the lava. But nevertheless, it wanted to kill us at any cost because that's all that was in his mind. The X-Parasite that took Quiet Robe, he helps us and then willingly sacrifices himself to give us his X-Parasite, his DNA, so that we can control the Metroid that we now are. By the way, that's my favorite moment. I know I've just skipped to the ending of the game, but that's my favorite moment in the entire game. I was just gushing. I gave this game 2 positives for the outro because that is just such an awesome moment on top of several other awesome moments. Most of the narrative side of this game is in all that visual storytelling. I love the voice acting on the Adam AI, by the way. Absolutely adore it. I love giving more backstory to the Chozo. The obvious statements of there being multiple Chozo tribes, which is legit. The conflicting Chozo tribes, which is interesting. You know, the idea of what they wanted to do with regards to the Metroids and the X-Parasites and why and how and what. All this stuff which was hinted all the way back in Samus Returns, of course. But my favorite part, really, is there's a constant impression. I don't want to compare this to other M, but there's a constant impression of Samus's mentality at almost every step of the way. Samus continues to be Samus in this game, even though she only has one line of dialogue, which is said in Chozo, which is awesome, by the way. But as she's going through the game, you can tell what she's feeling and thinking because of the body language. This is also an aspect of visual storytelling. The way that she moves and how she moves says so much about what she's thinking and how she's feeling in any given moment. it's awesome. And I can only just gush and heap praise upon their usage of that kind of animation, for lack of a better way to call it. I guess that's kind of it. I don't actually have much else to say. Wonderful atmosphere. I love the X-Parasite thing. I love what they did with Quiet Robe. I love what they did with Raven. The last boss fight was awesome, except it was boring. Little too much HP, like I mentioned. I hope the status quo is permanently altered. This is the final thoughts I have here. So we are now fully Metroid, but it's even worse than that. So we become fully Metroid, and we use that to absorb the energy of the entire facility, and also Raven himself. Also, this says a lot about the Chozo, that the guy was So we managed to grab onto him with our Metroid hand, and we're absorbing the energy from him, because we're Metroid. He's still flailing and struggling while we're draining enough power to bring the entire floating fortress down. Now, to me, that's not bad writing. To me, that makes sense, because that's just the Chozo and how they operated. It's exactly why the suit that we have is so damned powerful. It's because of the fact that it contains so much and can do so much. So it makes sense that Raven would also have a similarly ridiculously powerful suit, arguably more powerful. So we're pulling all that energy out of him, and then we get our Hyper Beam moment, named for Super Metroid, where we just blast the hell out of him. That's all cool. So we're full Metroid. This needs to be a mechanic in the next Metroid. I know Prime 4 isn't going to acknowledge any of the events of this game, which sucks, but this needs to be a mechanic going forwards. We need to have... we've already got the melee swing with our seemingly useless left hand, right? Give us the ability to grab onto, or to drain, or make it a risk-reward thing, or give us the ability to grab powers, or just to specifically take out enemies if we manage to get in range of them and grab their weak point and manage to drain the life out of the weak point. This needs to be a thing going forwards, and unfortunately I can't judge that because I'm in the present at the moment, not the future, which I'll be at a little bit before now. So I also, though, love the idea that we have been granted the Chozo DNA and the control knowledge from the X-Parasite, from Robe, to control that Metroid part of ourselves. So we're not a wild beast. We're not out of control. We are a fully in control Metroid. During the second to last cutscene, when we're talking to the Adam AI, which is totally not Ravenbig, he mentions that you are a threat to the galaxy, but don't worry, if you use your power properly, you can still be good. Now, I paused there to talk about how awesome of a sentence that is, because usually fiction does the thing that I hate. You know it. Power corrupts. And so any power is bad, and if you have power, you're evil. The end. I hate that. I've always preferred a more nuanced perspective on that, which boils down to power is a tool. It's something you can use in order to do. And if you are a decent person who wants to do decent things, you can do decent things as long as you are careful, as long as you are precise, as long as you are complex with your application of power. Now, obviously that was Raven saying that to us and trying to get us to submit. Well, that kind of taints that. Except the actual end of the game shows that he was exactly right. Because now that we have the ability to control the fact that we are a Metroid, well, now we can more precisely, complexly, and carefully apply our power. And God, I hope this affects things going forwards. This is probably my game of the year. The only game that might surpass this is Endwalker, and I'm not even going to play that till probably like January, so... I do hope, as ever, that you have all enjoyed. See you next time.